Out here in the empty desert north of Los Angeles on Route 138, you'll find these strange stone walls, collapsed foundations, and concrete slabs that almost look like an archaeological ruin. Now, most people driving past probably think they're the remains of an old house, a ranch, or maybe some forgotten development project from the early 1900s. But the truth is a lot stranger, because these ruins you see behind me were once the center of a movement sweeping through the region over 100 years ago, and a monumental dream by one man. A dream that attempted to establish a socialist utopia in the middle of the Antelope Valley here in Southern California. One that gained national attention and almost rewrote the future of Los Angeles. It was also a dream that ended in conflict, water shortages, and even had a connection to one of the biggest political bombings in California state history. Today, we're stepping inside the lost world of Llano del Rio, the utopian colony that tried to change America and nearly did. Before these walls crumbled, Llano del Rio was one of the boldest social experiments in the United States. Founded in 1914 by a man named Job Harriman, an American minister turned agnostic socialist, lawyer, politician, and activist. This area you see here was once built to be a fully cooperative city in the desert. And Harriman wasn't just any idealist. Just several years earlier, in 1911, he nearly won the mayoral race in Los Angeles on a socialist platform, when he was the leading candidate in the primary vote over his opponent, but ultimately lost in the runoff. It's reported that he was so close to taking the highest office in the city that the class of business elites who pretty much had unchecked power over the city's economy, politics, and labor laws at the time were in a panic, fearing that a socialist mayor might throw a wrench in the status quo. They even had an iron grip on the media narrative, with full control over the largest newspaper in the city, the Los Angeles Times, which during this era was a fiercely anti-union, anti-socialist paper running headlines warning of red rule if Harriman won. On a side note, just to give you an idea how much the LA Times and the major power brokers in Los Angeles during this era in the early 1900s detested the thought of a guy like Job Harriman being elected mayor and did their best to cement fear of socialism. Here's a quote from Harrison Gray Otis, then president, publisher, editor-in-chief, and general manager of the Times, that he wrote in one of his editorial pages. The election of Harriman would result in an orgy of evil, in a season of stagnation in businesses, in the curtailment of building, in the withdrawal of capital, in hunger in the homes, and rioting in the highways. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that Harriman wasn't their preferred candidate. Regardless of the most powerful individuals in LA society trying to stop him, it's said that Harriman was projected to win the office of mayor if it wasn't for a shocking turn of circumstances just days before the election, when his political career was derailed by a major event in Los Angeles history. The 1910 bombing of the LA Times building, when 21 people were killed, when union activists detonated an explosive inside the Times headquarters. Now, in the court of public opinion, bombings are never a good look. And even worse, the radical group who claimed responsibility for the bombings were self-described union militants, and although they were not directly members of the Socialist Party that Harriman was a member of, the damage was already done, and the mainstream news sources in the area, the LA Times, reinforced the narrative that Harriman and the Socialist Party were nothing more than anarchists and a radical threat. This bombing significantly damaged the public's perception of the labor and socialist movement that was swelling at the time, and triggered backlash that all but stopped the movement in its tracks. To make matters worse for Harriman, he served on the legal team defending the brothers, who eventually confessed to the atrocity. And overnight, the dream of a socialist mayor in Los Angeles evaporated. Refusing to stay down, Harriman shifted his strategies. If he couldn't turn Los Angeles into a model for socialism, well, he'd build a brand new city from scratch. Because shortly after the defeat, he purchased nearly 10,000 acres along with still Big Rock Creek, just east of Palmdale, and declared May 1st, 1914 as the official founding of Llano del Rio. And in this grand new city built for the people by the people, he envisioned circular city plans, communal kitchens, cooperative farms, schools, and worker-owned industries. Even the architecture was going to be revolutionary, designed by Alice Constance Austin, one of the most radical urban planners of the time. And the people came, by the hundreds. Families, workers, teachers, carpenters, idealists. At its peak, Llano del Rio had around 1,500 residents and 200 houses, a hotel, farms, factories, a newspaper, a school system, and a thriving community that believed they were on the forefront of a new American future. Some of the foundations over here. I'm not sure exactly what this was. It looks like it was some sort of building, but there's really nothing left but some stone walls. These look like they could have been rooms or houses or areas where they kept animals, I'm guessing. I don't really know for sure. Yeah, it looks like it could have been some sort of pen for animals, or maybe some sort of storage area. There's a lot of old cans here on the ground, old tin cans. I'm guessing those are more recent, probably not from over 100 years ago, but you never know. It's just amazing how quiet it is out here. I mean, the only thing I can hear is the road up there because there's kind of a busy road. But other than that, I can imagine over 100 years ago, around 1910 or 1916, when people were out here, it must have been very tranquil, very quiet, almost nobody out here. You feel extremely isolated. And that's part of the reason why this place didn't work out, because it was so isolated and they weren't really able to get water out here, or stable water. But it's pretty beautiful. I'm sure in the summertime it gets pretty dang hot out here. Right now it's December, so it's about 80 degrees right now, so it's not too bad. But I can imagine in the summer it gets well over 100 out here. Pretty brutal living in that. But it's interesting, the only thing left are these stone foundations, which are the only things that have remained from the community. It's almost like some ancient ruins out here in the desert that have just been left to decay. Now, when you look at the area today, although it's actually really quite beautiful, it's hard to imagine hundreds of people willing to pick up and leave their lives behind and move to a remote, inhospitable area in the California desert. But at the time in the 1910s, the average worker labored between 10 and 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the financial rewards of their labor were rarely enough to support a family. Simply put, Llano offered a way out of the circle of drain life for most working Americans. The reality was that life in Los Angeles around 1910 was not comfortable for many people. On one side were the powerful upper class who controlled almost every aspect of life in Southern California and were relentlessly pushing anti-labor narratives that were committed to crushing organized workers. On the other hand, you had socialist politicians, labor organizers, and thousands of working class Angelenos dreaming of fair wages, shared ownership, and community-driven society. Llano del Rio wasn't just a desert experiment, it was a counter-Los Angeles. In Job Harriman's view, if Los Angeles was being built for the elites on the backs of workers, then Llano would be built by the working class, for the working class, through cooperation. If LA suburbs would revolve around cars and private homes, Llano would revolve around communal living. And when LA was quickly becoming an engine for capitalism, Llano aimed to prove that socialism could work at scale. So now we're walking up to what I think was the hotel that they built. There's nothing really out here that tells you what the buildings were. There's not even a sign out here. Really nothing that gives you any information about this place. So when you look at a lot of these old structures that are left behind, you're kind of guessing what they were. I mean, up here it looks like this was the hotel that was built, kind of the main entrance area. You can see some chimneys. So I'm guessing there was a structure around that, but the structure's no longer there. Everything else is gone. But the chimneys and pretty much the front porch area, which you can pull up photos of. Other than that, you're just kind of guessing what things were. There's no signs, no information whatsoever, just a bunch of old structures made of stone, and these are really the last things that have survived. This is what's left. From what I could find in the early years between 1914 and 1916, it was surprisingly vibrant, organized, and by most accounts, successful for that period of time. Many in the colony genuinely, although still a work in progress, many in the colony genuinely believed they were building a new model for society. And these early years were periods of optimism and functionality, where many of the members felt that they were the closest they had ever come to living out their ideals. With 8-hour workdays, 5-day work weeks, and work week assignments rotated as needed, the community had a strong emphasis on collective decision-making. During these early years, they gained hard-earned self-sufficiency by establishing dairy operations, fields of alfalfa, grain, vegetables, a rabbit farm, and even a fruit orchard. This was a huge achievement for a desert colony in its infancy. Schools focused on independence, creativity, and civic responsibility. They built a hotel, a meeting hall, water distribution systems, irrigation ditches, housing units, workshops, and industrial facilities. Accounts of a rich social life with weekly dances, a baseball team, choirs, musical performances, a drama society, and even discussion circles on socialism, philosophy, and community. From accounts I found during this period from early members, people reported a strong sense of belonging and shared purpose. The colony even had its own newspaper, the Western Comrade. From the information I found, between 1914 to around 1916, Llano del Rio was growing in population, increasing production, building infrastructure, and on track to creating a genuine cooperative society. But while the dream was ambitious, the location was unforgiving. And soon this experiment in the desert ran into its first major problem: water. Llano del Rio relied on the seasonal flow of Big Rock Creek. Harriman wanted to build a dam to store water year-round, but the state denied their application. They said the colony didn't have the engineering ability to safely construct it. Without stable water, the Utopia was always one dry year away from collapse. Second problem was distance. The colony was too far from rail lines, cities, and markets. They could grow food, raise animals, and manufacture goods, but had little way to trade goods. And as you can imagine, these hardships eventually led to political infighting. For a community founded on equality, power became concentrated in a board run largely by Harriman himself. Some in the community even accused him of acting more like a boss instead of a comrade. Factions formed. One group, nicknamed the Brush Gang, rebelled against leadership, accusing them of hypocrisy and mismanagement. All this combined with the start of World War I, when industrial wages skyrocketed in the cities as the war machine demanded more labor. Pretty soon, residents began leaving for these higher-paying jobs, and the cracks widened. The population shrank, debt grew, the fields dried up, the board fought the rebels, and the utopia that once felt unstoppable began to crumble. It's said that the real death blow came in July 1916 when the colony's application to secure their water rights and build a dam to help irrigate their fields was denied by the California Commissioner of Corporations. Then, in 1917, Harriman made a desperate move. Reading the writing on the wall that the community would not be able to sustain itself without access to a stable water source, he began quietly looking for a new home for the colony. Instead of fighting the desert any longer, he proposed relocating the entire colony to Louisiana, to a place with cheaper land and abundant water. Some followed him, but most didn't. And by 1918, Llano del Rio filed for bankruptcy. Stockholders lost their investments, buildings were abandoned and left to decay. Families scattered. And just like that, one of the largest and most ambitious social experiments in American history vanished into the high desert. But for about 2 years, Llano del Rio truly was one of the most successful secular socialist communities in U.S. history. In my opinion, from the research I've done about this place, I think it's easy for skeptics to have a knee-jerk reaction and point to the rise and fall of the socialist experiment that was Llano del Rio as definitive proof that any form of socialism is doomed to fail. But when you look at the bigger picture, it seems like there were so many forces working against them from the beginning. The remote and harsh desert location being a major one, but also the powerful forces who wanted to see them fail, including local government officials and, of course, the LA Times, which was essentially a mouthpiece for big business interests of the time, who were more than happy to perpetuate negative publicity about the community and had a vested interest in seeing it become a failure. When you combine all of these external forces actively working against them, it really seems like they faced an uphill battle. And of course, the infighting didn't do them any favors as well. Nobody knows for sure if Llano del Rio would have lasted if they got access to the water source they needed. Regardless, parts of it still stand today as a fascinating part of California history. As for Job Harriman, by fall of 1917, he and his remaining backers found a suitable new homestead, an old mill town in Louisiana they named New Llano. And by early 1918, this location of Llano del Rio had been involuntarily forced into bankruptcy, and most of its colonists had begun to leave. And as the final members of the community said goodbye to the dream they'd built in the desert, the Los Angeles Times enthusiastically announced the collapse of a movement it had fought for years to destroy. At sundown tonight, Llano del Rio, which in its heyday had nearly 1,000 souls, will simmer down to a deserted village containing just 16 men. The town itself begins with a pretentious cobblestone hotel and men's dormitory, a large bathhouse for men, and the administration building and post office. It moves on across the street to the industrial center where there is a machine shop, a blacksmith shop, and a sawmill. All over this portion of the town site are the remains of what were homes, wrecked buildings, and the frames that once supported canvas that provided shelter for colonists. At the upper end of the town stands the Temple of Weaving Arts. A weather-beaten loom stands outside in the burning sun. The temple was to send Llano weaves to the socialist world far and wide. Just now it houses an old bed, a couple of broken chairs, and a pine table. When Llano del Rio crumbled, so did Harriman's dreams for California. He led his remaining followers to Louisiana for one last attempt at Utopia. And when that too unraveled, he slipped quietly into obscurity. It's said that he returned to Los Angeles in ill health, and in my guess, probably a bit defeated in life, and died in 1925. By then, he had retired from utopian and political work. Aldous Huxley, speaking of the Llano colonists he knew who had remained in the Antelope Valley, decades later described them as older, sadder, possibly wiser, and all of them bore witness to the happiness of those first few months in Llano. Housing, to be sure, was inadequate, food monotonous, and work extremely hard. But there was a sense of shared high purpose, a sustaining conviction that one had broken out of an age-old prison and was marching, shoulder to shoulder, with loyal comrade, into a promised land.